I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do this." And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
I was so excited to be on Daniel Lona's podcast, The Chess Experience. We talked a lot about self-improvement. I talked about what it means for me as an adult to try and improve all the techniques I used, and I write about a lot of this and skip the line, but all the techniques I'm using right now to try to improve at something that I haven't worked at in 30 years. And everyone's telling me, and they're still telling me, it's impossible. But guess what? I'm now flying out to LA next week because I was invited to play in the US Senior Championship, and I'm super excited about that. I talk about all these things and how to improve as an adult no matter what you're interested in. Talk about with Daniel Lona, and he was gracious enough to let me re-air his podcast on my podcast. So here's me as the guest.
Hey there! Today's show is unique. Why? Because my guest is a fellow adult improver, and I actually don't feature many of them on this show because when I do an education episode, I choose to mostly focus on chess coaches who can help us. But today's guest is not your typical adult improver. Today's guest is James Altucher, who is an extremely successful entrepreneur and author. His books focus on self-improvement and how you can be successful in different areas of your life. And his podcast, The James Altucher Show, is wildly successful with over 40 million downloads, jealous, and with highly accomplished guests in chess and outside of chess like Garry Kasparov, Judit Polgar, Richard Branson, Mark Cuban, and more. And these guests on his show give insights on career and personal improvement. So I thought it would be fascinating to talk with James about his own chess improvement to see how he applies some of what he teaches in his own books, as well as what he's learned from the successful guests that he's had. And even though James is actually a national master, his own story about getting back into chess recently is very similar to what we experience as non-titled players. And finally, James is just a really entertaining and engaging person to listen to, so I hope you enjoy the interview. Hey, James, how are you today?
Good. And once again, thanks for having me on your podcast.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Pleasure's all mine. I'm excited and honored to have you on.
I love talking about all things chess.
Perfect. Well, that's pretty much the entire conversation today. So yeah, really excited to have you on. I first learned about you as being a national master who wrote an article in New in Chess. And then I quickly learned more about you and realized that you're a really successful entrepreneur, an author, podcaster, and also that you have a somewhat similar journey to the adult improvers who listen to the show. So obviously I want to talk about all of that connected together. And we can just start by discussing your chess journey, a little bit about the first phase of your chess journey and how that began for you. I think you were a teenager at the time. Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't start playing. I mean, I knew the rules, but I didn't start playing until I was about 17. So basically, I was fifth on my high school. They needed an extra person on the high school chess team. Someone was sick that day. And so I was fifth board. And on the way, I didn't know anything. So on the way there, the teacher in charge of the chess team gave me this beat up old book by Fred Reinfeld about the Stonewall variation as white. And I played it and won, and I got addicted. And so that was it. And then my first actual tournament, though, I was early, I was around 17. I was 17 years old. And from there, I got addicted until I was about 18. And then there was college and girls. So I stopped playing in tournaments. And then I got addicted again a few years later when I was about 29 years old. And again, I was obsessed for about 6 months. Took lessons from John Fedorowicz, who's a grandmaster.
Mm-hmm.
I really spent all day and night studying chess. And I was also a full-time employee at HBO, the television company. And I was starting my first business. So finally, one of my partners at the first business said, "James, why are you doing this? This is a game for kids. Why you could be building a big business here." So I stopped playing again, and then I 25 years later, I decided to start playing in tournaments, and it's a different game now. So adult improvement, it felt easy to me back then in 1997 when I was 29 years old, but now it's difficult.
Yeah, it's a different game, no pun intended. But in the first big period for you in chess when you were a teenager, when you got into it for real, then you took that all the way to being a national master, right? I mean, was it in that first phase or was it later in your late 20s when you became a national master?
It was in my 20s because what happened was I started, and then about a little over a year later, when I was 18, I won the New Jersey Junior Championship and high school championship. So I was in that kind of national tournament of high school champions. And then once college started, I got to about 2050, and then I more or less stopped. But I really wanted to get to 2200. So when I started again in 97, or whenever it was, I figured, okay, I'm going to get the 2200. And about 6 months later, I went from 2050 to 2200, maybe a little more than 6 months. And then by the way, I wanted to stay above 2200 because I figured everybody knows what that means to be above 20. Everybody knows what a master means in chess, but nobody really knows anything else, like what an expert means or what an international master means. They just think if you say you're a master, they think you're like a grandmaster or something.
Right.
So I figured for business purposes alone, I wanted to stay above 2200. So when I felt like my rating was starting to slip, I just stopped playing in tournaments. And I haven't played in 25 years until a few months ago.
That's one way to hold on to it, right? Is just stop playing.
Well, then I found out that no matter once a national master, always a national master. So I wish I'd kept playing, but I didn't know that rule.
Yeah. So you took roughly a 24-year break from practicing and playing seriously. Is that right?
Yeah. I played Blitz online. I was one of the founders of ICC, which was an early online chess server. So I played Blitz obviously a lot online, but it was more like I would tell people, if you're on the phone with me, 100% guarantee I'm playing 1 minute chess while I'm on the phone. And that was pretty much the extent of my chess. I played thousands of games that way because I was on the phone a lot, but that was how I played chess.
Okay. So yeah, but not a serious approach to it where you're trying to get better every month and every year or anything like that.
No. And as an example, I was really surprised how different almost every aspect of the game was. Even though I would play Blitz here and there all throughout, and I'd go down to Washington Square Park and play Blitz or whatever in New York City, I had no idea of anything. Like I didn't know I would always just play on ice. I didn't know chess.com existed, Lead Chess. I didn't know there was such a thing called the London Opening. That for me was like a new thing. Also, one big difference is there's kids in tournaments now. Like when I was last playing, there really wasn't that many kids in tournaments. Now it's like 50% kids.
Yeah.
And just the whole way of studying, you have to know a lot more now to play good chess.
Yes, absolutely. I want to dive into that in a second. The differences and what you've observed in that. Definitely true about the kids. A lot of kids. I mean, I guess I can't speak to experience and knowing what it was like 20 years ago because I just did inter-school tournaments at that time. But yeah, it is surprising how many kids are in tournaments these days.
Yeah, like when I first started playing, I was the kid and I was 17. So I was like, now it's like they're 5 years old or whatever, and they're grandmasters already. But
Right.
it was just like, older, mostly men, and kind of slovenly. Like it wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't chess tournaments weren't known to be a place where you would find good hygiene. And then in the 90s, you would see a little change, but not so much. But now it's 100% different.
Yeah, absolutely. What got you back into chess?
Well, I guess like many people, I saw the Queen's Gambit and I was like, oh, I could do this. Here's a show about something that I love. As you know, and as many of the listeners know, it doesn't matter what rating you are, when you play chess, you love it. Like when you get to that level where you're playing in tournaments, you love the game. Back when I was 17 or 18, I read, for instance, the novel, The Queen's Gambit, which became later the TV show. I read all the fiction I could find about chess. I read every chess book I could find. And back then, you had to read chess books. Like, it's not like you had to set up a board. And if you wanted to learn an opening, you had to play out the opening and maybe write in a little notebook the critical lines. Like, it was different. So I saw The Queen's Gambit. And then I watched some streams playing chess, which I didn't know those existed. This was just like, last year, about a year ago.
Right.
And no, not even a year ago. A little more than a year ago. And, I watched, Hikaru's stream, Eric Rosen. There was all these new players I didn't even know existed. Like if you had asked me to name the top 10 players, I could have named one, Magnus Carlsen. Maybe even in the top 20, Anand, I would have named also.
Yeah.
But that's it. I didn't really know what was the chess culture at the time. And so I started watching these streams and I was just blown away by the level of entertainment of watching these streams, and B, the level of knowledge of all these players and like all these interesting traps and openings. And I knew my openings my repertoire that I had been playing for over 30 years was over. Like there was reputations for everything. So I kind of figured, okay, well, at the very least, I should watch these streams and understand what the current state of the game is. And that, of course, got me into the rabbit hole, which I haven't come out of.
Right. So you got inspired by the Queen's Gambit to get back, a little more seriously, at least get back into the game. Then you discover these streamers and like the new chess culture that's around today. So around that time, did you just start right away and go big back into chess, or was it a gradual ramp up to where you are now with it?
No, I started right away and got big back in. I can't, it's hard for me to do like halfway on anything. Like when I start a business, I'm fully in. When I write a book, I'm fully in. And for what was happening in my life at the time was I had been doing stand-up comedy actually for 6 years prior to this moment, like almost every night performing. And then COVID hit, and the combination of COVID forcing me to stay at home and the Queen's Gambit, it's almost like I needed something to be obsessed with. I was obsessed with stand-up comedy, and that's what I had been doing like nonstop. In fact, right before COVID, the week before COVID, I was touring all around the Netherlands, for instance, and doing comedy. And but I had been doing it every night. I was like addicted to it, and one addiction replaced another, which was chess. And I don't want to call it an addiction because I really do think it's obviously not a drug. It's a beautiful game, and I think studying it is different than being addicted to it. Like the times when I've been addicted to chess, I would just play blitz or bullet. But studying it is a whole different thing where you take it really seriously and you try to not only learn more chess, but you try to learn about learning, because that's a critical part for an adult improver, is that I haven't learned something like chess since I was in high school or since I was a young person. When you're in school, you're better at learning in a lot of ways than when you've left that behind 30 years earlier. So I had to kind of learn more about learning in order to be an adult improver at chess, in order to get back to where I was at chess.
Yeah, that actually brings up a topic I wanted to discuss with you a bit, which is how is it different now learning chess for you than it was back in the 90s? Either just your own personal approach to it or, also just what's available as well.
Yeah, it's a good question because it's sort of hard to answer. Like, I'm constantly trying to figure out when I learn something new, what's like an 80-20 rule here? What 20% can I learn that will give me 80% of the value? When I was younger, it was basically the cliche things. Okay, learn openings really well and study, puzzles and tactics. And I would pretty much just focus on those two things with a little bit towards the end game, but not so much. And I just got really good at my openings then, which meant something different then than it does now. Now it's a whole different game because of Chessable and the computer and so on. And I didn't really know. Here I was over 2,200 and kind of at my peak, at least, I was having tournaments with well over 2,300 performance ratings. So maybe at my peak, I was 2,300 strength. And I didn't really know. I realize now I didn't really know chess. Like I didn't know what it meant to like control the dark squares, control the white squares, take advantage of a space advantage. I didn't know what these things meant. And I feel like at that level, at the 2,200 level, you didn't really have to know that stuff. Now you do. You have to know a lot more, like chess. So coming back to it, I noticed several things. One is the chess world has advanced. So a 2,200 rated player or a 2,000 rated player or an 1,800 rated player or a 1,000 rated player is much stronger now than a 1,000 rated player was 25 years ago. There's no 1,000 rated player now is a strong player actually, and wasn't the case 25 years ago. Because at the very least, a 1,000 rated player does Puzzle Rush and watches some streams, looks at the computer for openings. So they get much better instant feedback to their games. And the same thing for every rating level. So the state of the chess world had improved. On top of that, I had declined because I hadn't been studying for 25 years. So even my shoddy opening repertoire, which has probably been refuted 10 times over, even that I couldn't even remember the lines after 25 years. Then there's a third aspect, which is I had just been playing Blitz. So my tournament skills, which you don't really think about, you think, oh, I'm just going to be the same as a tournament as I am in slow games online or whatever. My ability to play in a tournament had gone down, maybe because I was rusty or maybe because I'm older. So the stamina is different, although I don't quite believe that. But definitely the skills of playing in a tournament, I didn't realize that was a skill set, but it is. And that had declined. So in every way, when you come back to the game, you're at a disadvantage. And you have to really chop up all the skills you need to learn. I call them micro skills. And you have to like put together a study program for each one of those micro skills. And like anything, to get good, you usually need a coach. And then you had to understand that everybody else is doing the same thing. They're all using the computer, and many people have a coach, or if they don't have a coach, they have a virtual coach with the Twitch streams, depending on who their favorite streamer is, and so on. It's a very, very different experience than when I, went from 2050 to 2,200 in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I won't dive into it too much because this is your interview. But as someone who got into chess heavily in middle school in the 90s for myself and returned similar to you in this era now in the past year and a half or so, I mean, just everything about studying feels different.
Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main. That's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional, and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and or cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com. You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy.
You said something that intrigued me, though, that you look for the 80-20, the 20% of what you could do that's going to give you that 80% of your growth and impact. Have you found what that is yet?
No. And I really believed back in the 90s and if anyone asked me in the 00s, or all through the 25 years that I hadn't been playing, how do you get better at chess? I would have said, if you just study chess tactics every day, like solve problems and puzzles, you'll get to 2200. And I don't think so I thought that was the 20. 20% to say that gives you 80% of let's say the value of getting to 2200 and or 2000 or 1500, whatever level you want to get to. I don't think that's true anymore. I think you really have to know something about chess now. And by that I mean you need to know the deeper nuances of the game to get to any level. And I didn't know that. Again, I'm saying even at the level I was, I didn't know any of that. And I would just play. I would get into a position where, okay, I'm either going to storm the king or I'm going to, take control of the center and then storm the king. Those are the two chess concepts I understood. I'm either going to open up the H file and put my queen on H6 and checkmate, or I'm going to do F3, E4, E5, and start to take space on the center and then open the H file and get my queen on H6 and checkmate. And now you have to know many more concepts. So, and you really have to know them. You can't just know the opening. You can't just know tactics. I mean, it's great if you're really great at tactics, that you can't not be good at tactics. That's the one thing you can't not be good at. Right. But there's a lot of other things you need to do now to get better. I would say if you do know openings pretty well, you're going to have an advantage over someone who doesn't. So that's important too. And here's another thing I didn't know. I used to study the basic endgames. Like, how do you do it with, rook versus rook, and you have a bishop pawn and a rook pawn, and they don't. So I studied Ruben Fine's book, Basic Chess Endings, back when I was 18. And I didn't realize the role of tactics in endgames. And so now I study more tactics in endgames, and I probably don't know the more algorithmic endgames these days.
Do you have a goal in chess that you're working towards right now?
Yeah, well, for one thing, the first 3 or 4 tournaments I played in, and I lost immediately 100 rating points. And so goal number 1 is getting back to where I was. But I'd like to get to the FM title. I mean, it's hard to have. I'm always against having specific goals because maybe I'll be disappointed, and I just really enjoy the game and like playing. And I get disappointed, of course, when I lose, and you always get disappointed. You can't avoid getting disappointed when you lose rating points because that's the measure of how much you're improving based on the work you put in. So but I always tend to now view it as I get disappointed at first, and then, back when I was 18, if I lost a single game in a tournament, I couldn't even go to school the next day. Like, I would be so upset. Now I'll be upset, but I'll think to myself, okay, you really mostly only learn from your losses. So this gives me, when I lose, this gives me plenty of ammunition to study and get better. So I try to view it that way after I absorb the initial horror of the loss. But yeah, I think I'd like to get to the FM title, but really, I think the reason I have that goal is because not to tell everybody I have the FM title, because again, nobody even knows what that is. But it shows me that this game that I've probably done more than just about anything else in my life, I improved. I got better. I achieved a level that is significant.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that. And I think probably a lot of people listening can too, where I do have my rating goals, but I think for me, the most exciting goal is just to prove that I can improve and get better consistently.
That's a really good point, because when I talk about getting the FM title, that's for me, right? But someone who's listening to this, who's like an 800 rated player who'd like to get to 1,000, that's a great goal to have, or that really shows improvement. Particularly, it's hard to improve as an adult for many, many reasons. And some I agree with, some I don't. I don't think adults in general have slower minds than kids or have worse memory than kids. But what you just said, the feeling of improvement is a really great feeling. And everybody's got, a learning curve looks like an S. It's sort of flat at the bottom because you don't care. And then it's really steep because you do care. And then you reach some plateau and it kind of levels off, or you have other things going on in life and it levels off. Well, that feeling that when you're going up the steep part of the learning curve is a really great feeling. And to do it with something you love doing, and for your listeners, that is probably chess, it's a really great feeling. And so to spend a year or two feeling that curve again would be really nice, no matter what your level is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if I look ahead for the next 12 months of my chess improvement, sure, I'd love to improve by 300 points. But if it's quote unquote only 100 or 150, I still take a lot of pride in that. It just shows that I've put in work. I've succeeded at improving. And I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot of inherent value and joy in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a deeper way too, it shows you one of the most important things in life, which is, learning how to learn. Because we're never done from the time we're 0 to the day we die. We're learning the best we can about all the things around us. And chess is like a good kind of compact domain that in order to improve, you really have to study not just chess, but yourself. Like, how does one improve? How do I improve? What are the best methods for me to improve? So, for instance, if some people get too disappointed when they lose and they just stop learning. And one way to improve, if I'm going to think of the 80-20 rule, I'll definitely not improve at all if I give up after I lose 6 games in a row.
Right.
And so you have to learn the psychology. You have to learn what gives me stamina or what deprives me of stamina. What have I been fooling myself about? Like, okay, I thought I was a 2200. Well, in today's world, I'm not. So, I have to start from scratch and understand what it means to dominate the light squares or what it means to have a space advantage. I always thought I was good at tactics. Well, I'm out of practice. So it disappoints me when I see I'm not as good as I once was. So I have to study a lot of tactics and openings. I switched from D4 to E4, which maybe I shouldn't have, but now I'm really studying a whole new set of openings, which is a completely different game, by the way. If you've only played one opening, your whole life, and then you switch to the other, if you switch from like D4 to E4 or E4 to D4, it's 100% different game. It's not even comparable, the E4 game from the D4 game.
Yeah. Maybe one day I'll probably know what you're talking about. I mean, I know it from the reverse side where I always play 1E4 as white, and when I'm on the receiving end of 1D4 as black, it feels like a completely different game already. So I definitely hear that. Yeah, I just love what you said, James, about this idea that getting better at chess is a journey of learning how to learn. I absolutely love that concept. I think it puts a whole different perspective on it, where, yes, you can still care about your rating in that perspective, but it's not something you have to, live or die by. It's more about learning how to learn, as you say. And I think that's a great perspective.
Yeah. And I don't want to, I think it's almost a cliche to say rating is not important at all. It's extremely important because that's how you measure how you've been learning, how well you've been learning. But, it depends what you're talking about. Like on, online blitz, for instance, there's going to be high volatility. I can go up and down 200 rating points in a day. So there's huge volatility. But in a tournament, people don't play that many tournament games. So it's a different thing. So you really have to focus your efforts when you're playing in a tournament and getting a quote unquote, real rating or offline rating. And you're not going to go up or down 200 points in a day, although I've been able to do it more recently. And it's hard. Like in the last 9 tournament games I've played, I've won 6, drew 2, and lost 1. And my rating still went down, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
And because I lost to someone, a kid actually, very low, much lower rated than me. And he was good. I mean, there's nothing I could do about it. He was a good player. So part of learning for me now is also understanding what is the real strength of all these different players in different rating levels. And, and again, on every level, whether it's openings, tactics, end games, various middle game motifs, studying all of them. And right when I started to get better or learn again, I always do what I call plus minus equal. So a plus is you find a coach, someone who's going to look at your games, give you feedback, and help you study. Equals are, I find people my level and I play them and I maybe talk to them and exchange ideas. And that's been best done in tournaments because then you see people and you talk to them and so on. And then a minus, which is I give lessons as well. And the reason is if you can't explain something simply, then you don't truly understand it. So I called up the person who I gave lessons to briefly 30 years ago, and I asked him, "Hey, do you want lessons again?" And he said, "Sure, I just saw the Queen's Gambit." And I started giving him and a few other people lessons, which has been fun.
That's great. I love that. James, one of the topics I'd love to discuss with you now is the subject of age and improvement, because I think this weighs heavily on a lot of adults. They at least fear that age is affecting their improvement, and maybe at worst are, just convinced that it's limiting their improvement. And one of the things that attracted me to having you on this podcast was a recent chat you had with Grandmaster Ben Feingold. And you said with him that when it comes to improving at chess as an adult, you didn't believe that age means you have to slow down. Obviously, I love that attitude and believe it too. But for the skeptics out there, why doesn't age mean you have to slow down?
I look back to when I was 18. I don't even really think I had more stamina or strength or endurance then. Whatever sport I played back then, I could play the sport now, and I probably, can play it just as long now as then. I don't really feel that much slowed down physically. People tell me it happens at some point, but I haven't seen it yet, and I don't quite believe it. And people also told me my memory wouldn't be as good because of age, and I totally don't believe that. So yes, my memory is not as good as when I was 18, but I don't believe it's a biological thing. I think when we're a kid, we're so used to memorizing things all the time for tests and homework and class. Like we just build that muscle really well. So it's easy for me to remember things. And plus, I didn't have as much on my mind. So it was easier to shift things from short-term memory to long-term memory because my long-term memory was relatively empty. So, now, though, I'm out of practice with memory. So, yes, it's a little bit harder for me to remember things. But the flip side, I'm improving that. I'm actually taking memory lessons to improve my memory. And I'm practicing improving my memory. And I, in Chessable or courses like there's new methods for studying openings that didn't exist back then. And,
Right.
sometimes I find them helpful. And age takes, but also age gives. So I have more experience and I have more experience with learning new things. When I was 18, the only thing I'd ever really learned that was difficult was chess. But now I've learned many things that were difficult. And when I was in my 40s, I started from scratch doing stand-up comedy, which is incredibly hard. Or, when I was in my 30s, I started writing, and I've written 20 books since then. And these are incredibly difficult skills that I had to learn from scratch. So what age gives is it gives you kind of more ability to understand nuance and the gray areas. So when the computer says, oh, this move is bad, yeah, the computer's correct, of course, but it might not be a bad move for me, for instance. It might lead to the sort of position where I'm more comfortable than someone else rated the same as me. And so you start to, you figure out your unique path a little bit better. Whereas when I was younger, I would only say, oh, no, the book says this is good and this is bad, so I only have to play the good. So that's just one example of nuance. But in general, all the chess strategies, like what you do with an open file, what you do with, a bishop versus a knight, these are all gray areas, really, because sometimes a bishop is not better than a knight. Sometimes an open file is useless. And I feel like when you're older, you understand, at least for me, I tend to understand those things a little better. Like I feel I know chess now much better than I did when I was even 2200 when I was younger. It's just, again, the chess world's changed, so I have to know a lot more.
Yeah, wow, lots of great points there. I think, what stood out to me that you said, James, is this idea that age comes with strengths too. And I think there's too much emphasis focused on just some of the negatives or drawbacks, not necessarily to age just biologically, but also just from, as you're saying, that stage in life. There's some drawbacks, right? You have more responsibility, you have more things on your mind. But as you said, there's also a lot of strengths that you can now have being older that you didn't have when you were younger. And I don't feel like enough of the discussion around adult improvement focuses on that. It's just entirely what are the drawbacks, not what are the strengths. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, and look, we live in a society that celebrates youthful prodigies. Oh, this 12-year-old became a grandmaster. The top 20 players in the world are all under 40. I don't know what they are. Under 40. Anand's probably the oldest of the top 20, but almost all of them are younger than 40. Magnus is about, I don't know, he's like 34 maybe. And a lot of players in the top 20 are even younger than 30. So we celebrate this kind of youthful prodigies, but there's a lot of older people who play very, very strong. I mean, as recently as the 80s, you had Smyslov playing in the candidates tournaments in 1983 or 84. And, he played a candidates match against Kasparov, and Kasparov's first journey towards world champion. Smyslov was the world champion in like 1951, but he was still 30 years later into his old age, at the level where he was playing candidates tournaments. Now, I don't think you see that anymore. Tal played one of his best games, when he was in his 50s, unfortunately, like a month before he died against Kasparov, where he crushed Kasparov. So I don't believe any of the people who say age is relevant. And look, I've talked to Kasparov about this, and the one thing that age does give you is it gives you more things to do. So Garry Kasparov is a great example. He's a real hero in terms of his work in human rights and all the things he's done in that area, since he retired from chess. And so he's just, at the very top level, the youthful people play and study 24 hours a day. That's their jobs. And Garry had moved on to different things. But we don't have to compare ourselves to them. That's the top 20 in the world or the top 100 in the world. We compare ourselves to other, everybody, who's not in the top 20 in the world. They have other things to do in their lives. And so you can't use that as an excuse that age is a limiting factor, because there's plenty of older people who are in the 2200s or in the 1200s or in the thousands or in the 1500s. So age is not an excuse.
Yeah, that's all excellent points. I also think there's a huge difference between saying something like, oh, if you're, I don't know, whatever, 30, 40, 50, that means you may not be able to be world champion. Okay, maybe there's an argument there. And versus saying, well, you're 30, 40, or 50, therefore you can't go from 1,000 to 1,800. Sure, you can. I mean, I just feel like, sometimes the age discussion around chess improvement is just focused on, if you can't become world champion right now, therefore you can't improve or improve to excellent levels, which is sort of a ridiculous argument to me.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know
And
if that
look,
makes sense.
let's say you play 100 games in tournaments. Blitz games are good. Slow games are good. They give you different benefits. Slow games allows you to do deep calculation and thinking about a position. And blitz games kind of show you people think blitz is all about tactics. It's not really. It's about positional understanding, because you could play better. You could play faster if you know, oh, in this type of position, I do this. You don't have to calculate. Calculating will always slow you down. So blitz is actually more about positional chess and openings than it is about tactics. Maybe at the end, it's about the end of every game includes a tactic. So there is tactics in blitz, of course, but I would say calculating is more important for slow games. So if you study your losses, whether they're blitz or slow games, and I probably do it more with slow games than blitz games, you'll get better just because you'll understand what you did wrong and you'll try not to make that mistake. Like I was reading something where Heinrich Carlson says about Magnus that he never really, one thing about him is he never really studies the game, but when he plays a game and loses, he instantly digests what he learns. And so he's a very good learner in that way. That's part of the reason why you don't really know too much about his coaches and so on. And it's because he just absorbs the knowledge from his losses very, very quickly. Studying your losses and trying not to make those mistakes again, that alone will make you better. Try to do it in blitz. It's hard because you feel like, oh, I got to play the next blitz game, but
right.
That's a very good way to improve also.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to talk about the intersection between the concepts you discuss in your fantastic book, Skip the Line, and how that can apply to chess. So, for people who don't know, I would summarize your book as being about improving at a skill or career faster than what conventional wisdom would suggest is possible. And I guess I would start with what you said in that book, one of the big premises of it, which is that you don't believe in this 10,000 hour rule, that you need 10,000 hours to master something. And, for all of us out there who'd love to, if not master chess, at least get really good at it, why don't you believe in the 10,000 hour rule and what's required instead?
Well, the 10,000 hour rule usually refers to getting to be the best in the world at something. So if you're rated 800 and you want to get to 1,200, you certainly don't need 10,000 hours.
Right.
If you're rated, even if you're rated 1,000 and you want to get to 2,000, you don't need 10,000 hours. You just need to, again, know how to learn really well. That's the skill you really need is learning how to learn. And so what I prefer is, again, try to figure out what that 80-20 is. Like, where can I what's the 20% of work I could do that will give me 80% towards my goal? And so what I talk about often is experiments. Try to do experiments in whatever it is you're trying to learn. So, for instance, an experiment, if you're trying to learn Spanish, an experiment might be, okay, only talk Spanish. Even if you're living in the U.S., only talk Spanish for the next 30 days and go to lots of restaurants so you can speak restaurant Spanish. And that one experiment might get you, 50% towards where you want to be. Or, when I was doing a lot of stand-up comedy, one experiment I did was I went on a New York City subway and did comedy on the subway. And so you can't find a more hostile audience than doing stand-up comedy on a subway. And it also focuses you to be really good with your one-liners because no one's going to listen more than one line. And so I would do experiments like that. And an experiment in chess might be switching from D4 to E4, trying different things that you've never tried before. An opening's the best example. Or another experiment is, well, okay, I'm gonna solve 1,000 tactics and then play in a tournament. That's an experiment. And then you see if you do a lot better. You start to experiment to see where your 80-20 is. And that's always worked well for me.
So it's basically shifting at least some of the emphasis away from how many hours you're racking up to experimenting and learning what can be most effective for you. Is
Yeah.
that a way to describe it? Yeah.
Yeah. And that works for everything. Like look at Richard Branson. Okay, Richard Branson's famous entrepreneur, billionaire, started Virgin Records. And when he was 27 years old, he was a magazine publisher, a music magazine publisher. I don't know even if he had a record label yet. And he did an experiment. He was kind of disgusted with the way airlines were being run, and he called up Boeing, the that makes airplanes, the company that makes airplanes, and he said, "Can I borrow an airplane?" And they said to him, "Who are you?" And he was like, "Oh, I'm a 27-year-old music magazine publisher." And they're like, "Are you kidding me? Why would we lend you a 747?" And he says, "Listen, you have, British Airways has no competition in England, and what if they use Airbus instead of Boeing? So I'll use Boeing." And then he calls up the airport and he says, "Look, it's not fair that there's only British Airways. There's no competition. And so, give me a landing strip." And they gave him one at another airport, but, right near there. And same with JFK. And he did this little experiment. They all could have said no, and his experiment would have been over, and we never would have heard about it. But instead, he started Virgin Air, and that actually made him the most money out of anything he's done in life, was from that one experiment. So if you're really good at the aspects of an experiment are, it's very cheap to do. So it's very cheap for Richard Branson to make these phone calls, cost him nothing. It was very cheap for me to do comedy on a subway, cost me nothing. So it's very cheap to do because most experiments fail by just the nature of being an experiment.
Right.
And they have very little downside. Like, there's no such thing as failure in an experiment, because even if an experiment doesn't work, you can ask yourself, well, why didn't it work? Well, so on the subway, if everyone booed me, I could say, why did they boo me? Maybe my one-liners were no good. I should get better at that. So there's always information you get, even when your experiment doesn't work out. But then the upside is enormous on an experiment. I mean, Richard Branson made billions. We don't know how many experiments he failed at, but we know from that one experiment, which took him a day or two to make those phone calls, he made billions of dollars. Of course, there was a lot more work than that, but it started off as an experiment. So, Thomas Edison, famously, 10,000 times he tried to make the right kind of wire to light a light bulb. And it was on the 10,000th try, supposedly, that he succeeded. And a reporter asked him, "Mr. Edison, how does it feel to fail 10,000 times?" And Edison said, "My good sir, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I learned 10,000 ways not to light a light bulb." And that's a good way to approach this, because you're going to fail everything worth getting good at. You're going to fail a lot. There's not really such thing as talent. Maybe there is a little bit. Maybe there's like 5% of it, and some people are more talented than others. But for anybody rated between 500 and 2,300, say, we're all kind of have the same level of talent. Then after that, what separates people is how good they are at learning.
Yeah, absolutely. You're speaking my language here. I feel like I'm also one of the few people who doesn't really believe much in talent, and I think I'd have to set aside another hour to discuss that with you on another podcast, which I'd love to do. But I love hearing you say that anyway.
But the thing is,
Yeah.
It also depends when you start. Like, it is true that if you start playing chess when you're 5 years old, you don't have anything else to do. You can play chess for the next 10 years, like 8 hours a day. No
Right.
one's going to criticize you. So that's why it seems like kids are more talented, but they're not. It's just when you start at the age of 24, when you have a job and you have kids and you're getting married and you're paying the mortgage, you're not going to be able to put in the same energy that a kid would, which is why it's so important to make sure you're using your energy properly. Like, instead of going on Twitter an extra 10 minutes, solve, 5 chess puzzles. Make sure you're using your fringe moments appropriately. You're in the back of a cab, study chess. Wasting time on Twitter, stop and study chess. When you're older, you have to use your fringe moments where it's sort of random what you're doing. You have to use those moments in a more curated fashion and use it to your benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that the biggest advantage that kids have over adults isn't so much something biological, but just the time and the hours that they have to put into it.
This is such a valuable service for all business owners, big businesses, small businesses, doesn't matter. I wish I had this in the many different businesses that I've started. Sometimes it seems like your business is humming, but then suddenly you don't understand it. You're starting to fall behind. You're not understanding where your costs are, where your revenues are, where your payments are. Teams are buried in all sorts of like BS work, and you can't seem to close the books. So you need like one dashboard, one source of truth. I'm jealous of this business, NetSuite from Oracle, of course, NetSuite by Oracle. I wish I'd come up with this idea. It's a brilliant concept to have all your business intelligence on one dashboard. This is why you need to know these three numbers: 37,000, 25, and 1. So 37,000, that's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the number one cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. One, because your business is one of a kind. So you get a customized solution for all of your key performance indicators, your KPIs, in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need to grow all in one place. So right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/James. That's netsuite.com/James to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/James. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin, or on chess from Garry Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
On the experiment subject, I'm curious. I know you said that, experiments by nature will more often fail than not, and that's fine. Have you done any experiments that have worked for you in chess?
Yeah, at every level. So I might experiment with, I'm going to play much more tactical and attacking oriented openings. I'm going to try an experiment. Or I'm going to try an experiment. I'm going to play a much more slower positional opening because I don't want to get a bad position out of the opening. And then I'm going to see where my positional ability is and just play a maneuvering positional game. So for instance, on the one hand, I could play some wild E4 gambit, or I could play the much slower Kali system. It's a D4 opening, like it's D4. It's almost like a London, except your bishop stays on C1. And that's a much slower maneuvering type of game. And you're not going to get a huge tactical free-for-all by move 10. You're still going to be maneuvering then. Those are two different experiments that I actually have tried. And turns out I wasn't that good at the slower maneuvering ones. And I could see very clearly that I had many more opportunities in the tactical attacking free-for-alls. But I learned a lot about myself. Like I had to learn how to, when I'm out of book in those, I have to switch into tactics mode instead of being scared. Like what's the next book move? And so it made me treat openings in a different way. So just a few experiments changed completely the way I view my own personal openings. And chess is a little harder to quantify what the experiments are, but like the way I'll try different ways of studying tactics. Like, should I study positions that take 20 minutes to solve, or should I study more positions that take 3 seconds to solve? And I've experimented doing one thing one day and then playing chess and see how I do. And then the other thing the next day and playing chess and see how I do. It turns out for me, I feel like I get much more improvement when I study intermediate level puzzles instead of the hard level puzzles, which, let's say a hard puzzle takes me a minute to 2 to solve, and the intermediate ones might take me 10 seconds to solve. That gives me, for some reason, allows me to solve more problems, which is better for my tactics in the game. So that was something you get data, so you document what happens in an experiment, and you decide what to do.
Right. That's excellent. You have a lot of great lessons in your Skip the Line book. I'm wondering if there's, even in addition to the experimentation idea, if there's any others that have worked for you as applied to your chess improvement journey.
Yeah, studying my own games is something I really didn't do so much before 30 years ago, but is hugely important. I see very clearly how hugely important it is for me now. And I do that with a coach. And so I take lessons from Jesse Cry, who has the YouTube channel and Twitch stream Chess Dojo Live.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a very good coach and really encourages me on studying my own games. So that is an experiment that I had never really done before, but it works really well.
What was the lesson from your book that led you to that?
Well, having the plus minus equal.
Okay.
Because he became my plus. He was my coach, and he suggested doing this. And I had seen people write about that, but I never really took that seriously before. I figured, okay, if I lost, I didn't know that opening so well, so I'll just study that opening again. Now I really understand, okay, I went on a little adventure with my queen over on the queen side when it should have been more in the center and not as committed. So I'll learn things about myself. Like I learned from studying my own games that I'm not very good at evaluating whether I'm slightly better or slightly worse.
Yeah.
And so I had to get a lot better at that. But I never knew that before. I always thought, if I'm down, it's clear. And if I'm up, it's clear. But I saw some positions where I thought I was down, but actually I was ahead. I just needed to defend. I thought every time I was defending, I was down. But, like the computer would say that I was down. Get really scared or nervous and then make really super defensive moves and then lose. So, and this was helpful, studying these positions with the coach and also looking at the computer. But really, the other thing that's very interesting is studying games over a real board, because you should always practice what you actually want to do. So if I just watched Twitch streams about chess, okay, that would help a little and it's entertaining. But when I'm playing in a tournament, you're not watching TV, you're playing over a real board. So there's also some benefit to exactly mimicking the situations you're going to find yourself in. And that's the real study. So looking at my games over a real board is very valuable, as opposed to even looking at them on a screen.
Interesting. Yeah, I've always been an advocate of working on the board if you're going to do over the board tournaments, but I haven't thought about reviewing the game on the board. I review it on the screen. So that's an interesting point.
The other thing is, and this is advice Judith Polgar gave me, which is practice blindfold chess, because then you get very good at visualizing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did an experiment. Like one day I just studied like for a couple hours blindfold chess, and then I played Blitz online, and man, I was just killing it. And so I've made it more of a regular practice now to study. There are some books actually about blindfold visualization that I bought, and that was a really good experiment to take. Obviously, to take Judith Polgar's advice is in itself a good thing to do, but
Right.
it turned out to be very good advice.
Yeah. You interview a ton of highly successful guests on your podcast, from Tony Robbins to Garry Kasparov, and I'm very jealous of all that, but it's amazing. Have there been any lessons that you've learned about success or improvement from these very accomplished people that you've been able to apply to your own chess journey?
Yeah. I mean, with all these successful people, and I've interviewed like well over 1,000 of them, including Richard Branson, by the way, who I talked about earlier, but
Yeah.
many, many people in many different industries. And there's some overlap to what they all say, but it's always interesting to see the different things they say. Like Garry, for instance, Kasparov was very talented right from the get-go. And so it's not like he could really describe very well what he studied. He's like a true genius right out of the box. And so from him, I learned different things than studying chess. But for most people, it's really about trial and a lot of error. So it's really about it's about liking yourself enough that you could fail a lot and be disappointed a lot and still know that your identity is not wrapped up in this. It's not wrapped up in how much money you have. It's not wrapped up in what your chess rating is. As much as you want to get to 1,000 or 1,500 or whatever, and believe me, it's disappointing when you lose games and go down rating points, but that's not who you are. And I think that was really important to realize. The other thing is also have like a higher purpose to what you're doing. So sure, it's great to play chess, but also if I were to give a higher purpose to what I'm doing is I want to show that adults can improve, for instance.
Yeah.
And so always try to give yourself kind of a meta purpose to everything you do. Like, do you want to make $1 million, or do you want to make a business that helps the lives of 1 million people? Now, both are the same goal, but having that higher purpose really allows you to persist even when things seem to be going against you for a long period of time. So I think that's really important for many of these people. Like you pick any business, like Michael Dell. He didn't just say, "Oh, I want to make $1 million in my college dorm room." He said, "Oh, there's got to be a cheaper, better way to sell computers than buying these expensive IBM PCs, from IBM. I'm going to just, buy the parts, construct computers in my dorm room and sell them super cheap." And that's what he did. And it became, he's worth like $30 or $40 billion now.
Yeah, that's amazing. You've had interviews with, like I said, Kasparov and Judit, and you mentioned Judit Polgar. Who else is on the top of your list in chess that you'd love to meet or have on your podcast that you haven't already?
Well, obviously Magnus Carlsen. And by the way, I've played a blitz match against Henrik Carlsen, his father, who's about a 2,300 player, like FIDE strength. And then he came on the podcast. He's a really great guy. The match, if I remember correctly, see, this is where my memory is. I think it was like 4-2, something like that, or 3-2, where he won. And but I felt happy with it. I was very nervous. And in the chess world, I was very happy to have Judith Polgar on because I'm a big fan of her style. And of course, Kasparov was a dream come true.
Yeah.
When I had Garry on, he's been on my podcast 3 or 4 times now. But the first time he was on, I brought a chessboard, and he had written a book about AI or something else unrelated to chess, and we talked. That's what we talked about in the podcast. But then at the end, I said, "Can we play a game of chess?" And I could see. I feel bad now thinking about it. I could see he was so disappointed I asked that. He really did not want to. There's no upside for him to play a game of chess with me. And of course, we did play, and he crushed me. And actually, the game's on YouTube somewhere if you Google like Altucher and Kasparov. But I guess he felt like he had to play. I just been, talking about his book, and we were going to advertise his book on the podcast and so on. But I could see he really didn't want to play. But he was good about it, and he played and appropriately crushed me in an opening that I'd been playing for 30 years. And that was the last time I played that opening. I literally thought he refuted that opening. Now I've since studied it. I don't know if he refuted it, but it was a very good line that he played. And, other people in the chess world other than Magnus, it's an interesting question because my podcast is not about, I don't know how big my chess playing audience is. So yeah, I would love to interview Hikaru or Grishik or, some of these other players, but it's not really the place for it on my podcast. At some point I'll interview my coach though, like Jesse Cry, because that's about learning and not just about chess.
Right. I guess, Hikaru has a really successful business now too. So there's that overlap as a subject, right? Since
That's true, actually. How to convert your love into business. Maybe I'll be able to reach out to him. I'll tell you a story. One of the very last tournaments I played in, I'm playing it was 1997. I'm playing this little kid, and this is how memory works. I thought I beat him, but when I look back at the tournament records on uscf.org or whatever the URL is, it turns out this little kid I was playing back in 1997 won. But I remember this other, even smaller kid, his little brother, at the end of the game, he couldn't even reach like the board, and he was like jumping up and down to his brother. You should play this. You should play this. He's going through all these complicated variations, and that was like the 6-year-old Hikaru, advising his brother,
wow,
on what to play. And I'm like, who's this little kid? Like, the game's over. Like, whatever. and then I remember, I think this might have been my very last tournament. I had a really good run of unbeaten games. I was unbeaten, either won or draw. And I was playing, I felt, at like 2,300 strength. And then I played this 13-year-old girl, and she crushed me in 9 moves. And after the game, and I knew what the 9th move was my weak move, but she even came up to me and said, instead of bishop b5, maybe you should have done this on the dark squares or whatever. And that was Irina Crush. And she crushed me. And I figured, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't compete. And that's kind of when I stopped playing. Then.
Well, I mean, I guess if someone had to beat you and had it lead to that, at least it was someone famous. I don't know.
Yeah. I played a lot of, even in tournaments now, I played a lot of like strong, prodigious kids. Like, they are so good, these kids. It's like unbelievable. And I'll ask them, what do you think you're good at? Positional stuff, tactics, openings. And they'll say, oh, I'm horrible at openings, or I'm horrible at tactics. But then you play them a game and they have like the most dazzling tactics, and they know the opening to the 18th move. And then after the game, if you're going over, I always try to go over the game with my opponent. They're like, oh no, there's this variation. They know openings perfectly. Like, I don't know. I think maybe when you're playing kids, the best thing to do is to get into non-familiar opening positions and that you might understand very well. And I know that sounds vague, but they really do know openings well. Yeah. And I think they do have trouble outside of their traditional openings.
That's good advice. May have to adjust my repertoire a bit for that, since I play such popular openings.
Yeah, well, I play the King's Indian, but now I might start it off with, let's say they do D4 and I do D6 and they do C4. To get into the King's Indian, you do knight F6. But I might do E5 right away. And it puts me into positions I'm very familiar with because they're King's Indian-like. But for the kids, they're immediately out of theory.
Yeah, that sounds like a good strategy. I have to consider that. I haven't thought about that enough. James, what content, books, resources have you created that you think would be great for adult chess improvers to consume?
Well, definitely my book, Skip the Line, inspired me to use those same techniques, to prove out those techniques while studying chess. So that's a book I wrote about learning something very quickly as an adult. It's like the perfect book for adult improvement. It's all the techniques I've used as an adult, whether it was business, day trading, podcasting, or comedy, or writing, or chess. I've had to learn many skills at like an almost professional level or a solid professional level throughout because I've changed careers a lot as an adult. So I think that's very important.
And by the way, I also talk in that book about how to, and I'm not promoting the book, don't buy it if you don't want, but I also talk about how you should monetize doing the things you love. Like now in this world, take Eric Rosen as a great example. He is one of the best Twitch streamers on the planet. He's such a skilled streamer, and it shows that you don't have to be in the top 100 or even the top 1,000 in the world to be a professional now at what you love. And Eric's a great example of that. He makes a ton of money streaming, and unlike Hikaru, he's not a grandmaster. He's not in the top 20 in the world, but he's a great. For all I know, he makes more money than Hikaru streaming. So I don't know. And there's many examples like that. There are people who are even in the 1800s who are professional level in chess, but just not playing, but doing other things. So I talk a lot about that in that book. But in terms of chess specifically, I think if you get books of tactics, I really like these blindfold books. I take them with, the books that give you blindfold exercises. I take those with me to tournaments. There's a great book I read recently that was really powerful by Cotronius about how to play equal positions. And he basically said Magnus was great at playing equal positions. So that was very interesting to see how Magnus will outmaneuver someone in a very equal position in order to find opportunities. Along those lines, Gotham Chess has a video where he shows Magnus, who's 2,800, beating 2,400s. And I thought that was very useful. Like a 2,400 will crush me, but here's how Magnus just dismantles these people who crush me, and seeing how he did it, that was very useful. So like, I don't always understand when Magnus is playing Caruana. Like, I don't always understand what they're doing.
Right.
Nobody does except that. But when Magnus is dismantling a 2,400, it's a little easier to understand and see the difference in skill level. So that was very useful. And I always go through at least one Mikhail Tal game a day, just to kind of, ultimately, to win a game at chess, you gotta destroy someone. And Tal was great at destroying his enemies. He would kill his enemies, and so he would kill his enemies were his opponents, and he would literally annihilate them. And it was insane. Like if you go over the World Championship in 1960, Botvinnik Tal, there are games where he makes the most insane moves that I can't even imagine making that against the world champion of chess. And then he would just dismantle Botvinnik. And everybody knew it was a bad move. And the computer now says, yeah, it's a bad move. But he knew how to destroy people. So he's a good person to have as a virtual mentor.
Yeah, for sure. I think maybe my last question here for you, James, is, you mentioned that the higher purpose that you've attached to your own chess journey is to show that adults can improve. And I love that. I mean, I'm not trying to steal that or anything, but I've felt like that's been part of what I've been trying to do as well, as having a higher purpose for my own chess journey. So I really relate to that. And because I think that's so awesome, I'm curious, do you plan on, documenting at least the highlights of your journey somewhere, a blog, a video, or a book, or anything like that along the way?
I think probably a book. But that's only if I get to, if I end up at like 1,800 instead of 2,400, I probably won't write a book. Another person, by the way, another experiment I did, and this is a weird experiment, but there's this guy, Stephen Kotler, who writes about how to get into the flow state. And when you're playing chess and you're deep into the position, you're in a flow state. You lose track of time, which often causes time trouble, but you're thinking very, very deep. And he said there's evidence that if you feel grateful, it's easier to enter the flow state. So I've experimented with feeling grateful between each move, and that I find nobody believes me on this, but it's upped my game quite a bit.
So interesting.
And I should mention that over the past year, like my classical rating on Lead Chess has gone from basically like 2,000 to 2,400. So I guess in that sense, these techniques have all been working for me, and now I'm also I have to improve my tournament playing skills as well.
Yeah, well, maybe that's one of your 20s in the 80-20 is the gratitude between moves. Who knows?
That could be.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's really interesting. I definitely might want to try that. And to your point about experiments, that's a low cost experiment to try.
Try it in Blitz tonight.
Yeah, exactly.
I was amazed. Like I would be right after I did that podcast with Steven, I played some Blitz. And like I'd be in these tough positions, and then I would just take a step back and for a few seconds think of all the things I'm grateful for, and then boom, I would find like some creative move that I didn't see before.
That's amazing. That's amazing. All right, I'm convinced. I'm going to try it for sure.
Yeah.
Well, James, it was so great having you on the show today. I really loved our conversation. I feel like I could talk about this for another 2 hours with you, all these different topics. It's amazing to hear your insights and to just have this great conversation with you. So I encourage everyone out there to get your book, Skip the Line. I think it's really helpful for adult improvement. I've really enjoyed it myself, as well as everything else that you do. Your podcast, your other books, everything is just...
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, all fantastic. I've really enjoyed discovering your work over the past month or so.
Who's your favorite chess streamer?
Oh, interesting. Chess streamer. It's probably Levy, Gotham Chess. Yeah.
Yeah, he's good.
He's one of the first that I discovered in my return to chess about a year and a half ago. And I mean, I just think he does an amazing balance between entertainment and education. And I don't know if there's many others who can kind of offer both at such a high level that he does. So,
yeah. And so here's one last challenge I'll give your listeners and yourself, and I'm giving to me as well.
Sure.
Don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone. And so one of the most popular chess books in history is Bobby Fischer's My 60 Memorable Games. Now, he was the world champion. He's maybe the best player ever, and who knows. And so you feel like, okay, he could write that book. But I challenge anybody to write a book called My 60 Memorable Losses. It doesn't matter if you're an 800 rated player or a 2800 rated player. Write the book. Go to Amazon. You could upload basically a formatted version of your book, and it'll be published instantly on Amazon as both a paperback and a Kindle. Just write the book and do it. And you might say to yourself, well, no one cares about my losses, my games. I'm not, a world champion. Doesn't matter. Anyone could publish a book. And when you do that, it'll make you take your losses really seriously when you study them. And you'll learn those openings and you'll study these losses. And maybe the only people who buy it is your family. But think about this, your great-grandkids, they might love chess. And they realize, their great-grandfather or mother wrote a book about their 60 memorable losses. And that could be their starting point for them being the world champion. So just do it. And don't worry about feeling like an imposter.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think the good news about that type of book is that we're all qualified. We all have 60 losses, many more than that. So
yeah,
it's just a matter of whether your ego can handle it, right?
Yeah.
But I love that. And I love the idea of, just diving into your losses and understanding why they happened and the learning that would come with that. Again, thank you, James, so much for your time today. It's been great talking to you. Loved everything you said. And just been an honor to have you on the show. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for having me on the show. It was really a pleasure talking to you. It's my favorite topics, obviously. So I could talk about it forever, which I probably did. So thank you once again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Whether in person or remote, open communication with your doctor is key to managing any condition, including heart failure.
How have you been feeling? I'm okay.
Both are great options to continue having open conversations with your doctor about how you're feeling.
I've had less energy.
And when you speak openly with your doctor, they're better equipped to help. Visit heartfailuretalks.com to learn more.
Luxury is meant to be livable. Discover the new leather collection at Ashley with premium quality leather sofas, recliners, and more, all built to last. No matter how many spills, scuffs, or pet-related mishaps come its way, the leather collection at Ashley is made with the durability you need for the whole family. Shop the new leather collection at Ashley and find chairs starting at $499.99 and sofas at $599.99. Ashley, for the love of home.